In a landmark decision that sent shockwaves through the corridors of power, the High Court has delivered a stunning rebuke to the Department for Work and Pensions, halting their controversial benefit cuts program in its tracks. This victory represents more than just a legal triumph. It's a powerful vindication for millions of vulnerable citizens who have long struggled under the weight of austerity measures. Today, we delve deep into this momentous ruling that has fundamentally altered the landscape of social welfare in Britain. The morning of the ruling dawned like any other at the Royal Courts of Justice, but by day's end, the foundations of British social policy would be forever changed. The case, brought forward by a coalition of disability rights activists, poverty action groups, and affected claimants, challenged the DWP's authority to implement sweeping cuts to essential benefits without proper impact assessments or parliamentary oversight. What unfolded in that courtroom would become a testament to the power of collective action and the enduring principles of social justice. At the heart of this legal battle lay a simple yet profound question: can a government department unilaterally reduce vital support to society's most vulnerable without proper consultation or consideration of the consequences? The DWP had argued that their reforms were necessary to modernize the benefit system and reduce public spending. However, the reality on the ground told a different story, one of increasing hardship, mounting desperation, and lives pushed to the breaking point. Sarah Thompson, a single mother of two from Manchester, became one of the faces of this struggle. After losing 40% of her disability benefits under the new regulations, she found herself choosing between heating her home and feeding her children. It wasn't just about the money, she recalls, her voice trembling with emotion. It was about dignity, about being treated like a human being rather than a number on a spreadsheet. Sarah's story, along with countless others, formed the emotional backbone of the legal challenge that would ultimately succeed in court. The judgment itself was unequivocal in its criticism of the DWP's actions. Justice Eleanor Hamilton, delivering the verdict, stated that the department had failed in its most basic duty of care and had implemented cuts with reckless disregard for the human cost. The ruling highlighted multiple breaches of equality legislation and administrative law, effectively forcing the DWP to immediately suspend its cutting program and review all cases affected by the previous decisions. The implications of this victory extend far beyond the immediate halt to benefit cuts. It represents a fundamental shift in the relationship between government departments and the citizens they serve. The ruling establishes crucial precedents regarding the necessity of proper consultation, impact assessments, and the consideration of vulnerable groups in policymaking. More importantly, it sends a clear message that administrative convenience and budgetary concerns cannot trump basic human dignity and the right to adequate support. The legal team that secured this victory was led by Helena Martinez QC, who brought together decades of experience in social welfare law with a passionate commitment to social justice. This wasn't just about legal arguments, Martinez explained after the ruling. It was about bringing humanity back into the system, about reminding everyone that behind every statistic is a real person with real struggles and real needs. The case revealed shocking details about the DWP's internal decision-making processes. Internal documents obtained during the proceedings showed that department officials had been warned about the potentially devastating impact of the cuts, but chose to proceed anyway. Risk assessments had been either ignored or deliberately downplayed, while concerns raised by frontline staff were dismissed as overly cautious. One particularly damning piece of evidence was an email chain between senior DWP officials discussing ways to fast-track the cuts before proper impact assessments could be completed. This revelation caused audible gasps in the courtroom and was specifically cited in Justice Hamilton's ruling as evidence of institutional failure at the highest levels. The human cost of the DWP's actions became increasingly clear as witness after witness took the stand during the 3-week hearing. James Cooper, a former carpenter who lost his ability to work after a devastating accident, described how the cuts had forced him to sell his mobility equipment just to afford basic necessities. "I felt like I was being punished for being disabled," he testified, his words echoing through the hushed courtroom. The ruling has immediate practical implications for millions of benefit claimants across the country. All pending benefit reductions must now be halted, while cases where cuts have already been implemented must be reviewed with urgent priority. The DWP has been ordered to establish a dedicated team to handle these reviews and ensure that affected claimants receive appropriate back payments. The victory has energized advocacy groups and civil society organizations across the country. The Disability Rights Coalition, one of the main organizations behind the legal challenge, has already announced plans to establish a nationwide network of support centers to help affected individuals navigate the review process. "This is just the beginning," declared Maria Chen, the coalition's director. "We're going to ensure that every single person affected by these illegal cuts gets the justice they deserve." The ruling has also sparked a wider debate about the future of social welfare in Britain. Politicians from across the political spectrum have been forced to confront the reality that years of austerity measures have created a social crisis that can no longer be ignored. Several MPs have already called for a comprehensive review of the entire benefits system, with a focus on ensuring dignity and adequacy rather than just cost-cutting. The impact on DWP staff themselves has been significant. Many frontline workers have expressed relief at the ruling, saying they had long felt uncomfortable implementing policies they knew were causing harm. One anonymous employee described the atmosphere in their office. "There's a sense of vindication. Many of us have been raising concerns about these cuts for years, but nobody would listen. Now, finally, someone has." The legal victory has also highlighted the crucial role of legal aid and access to justice. The case would never have been possible without the support of pro bono legal services and crowd-funded contributions from thousands of ordinary citizens. This aspect of the victory has prompted calls for increased funding for legal aid services, particularly in cases involving social welfare and human rights. International observers have taken note of the ruling, with similar cases now being prepared in other countries. The United Nations Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights has praised the decision as a model of judicial oversight in the protection of social rights. The case is already being studied by legal scholars and human rights advocates worldwide as an example of how legal action can effectively challenge harmful government policies. The ruling has also exposed systemic issues within the DWP that require urgent attention. The court heard evidence of a target-driven culture that prioritized cost-cutting over human welfare, inadequate training for decision-makers, and a complaint system that was effectively designed to discourage appeals. Justice Hamilton's ruling mandates comprehensive reforms in these areas, with regular judicial oversight to ensure compliance. For the disability rights movement, the victory represents a watershed moment. Years of grassroots organizing, protest, and advocacy finally culminated in this decisive legal victory. The movement's leaders are already planning how to build on this success, with plans for a national campaign to reform disability assessment procedures and establish more generous support levels. The economic arguments presented by the DWP were systematically dismantled during the proceedings. Expert witnesses demonstrated that the supposed savings from benefit cuts were largely illusory, as they led to increased costs in other areas such as healthcare, emergency services, and homelessness support. The ruling specifically noted that the department had failed to conduct proper cost-benefit analyses that took these wider social impacts into account. One of the most powerful moments in the case came when Dr. Elizabeth Watson, a leading expert in social policy, presented research showing the direct link between benefit cuts and increased mortality rates among vulnerable populations. Her testimony, backed by comprehensive data analysis, left no doubt about the literal life and death implications of the DWP's policies. The role of medical professionals in the case was crucial. Dozens of doctors and healthcare workers provided evidence about the devastating health impacts they had observed in their patients following benefit cuts. Their testimony painted a picture of a healthcare system struggling to cope with the consequences of social policy decisions made without proper medical consultation. The ruling has particular significance for mental health advocacy groups, who have long argued that benefit cuts have created a mental health crisis among vulnerable populations. The court heard extensive evidence about increased rates of anxiety, depression, and suicide attempts among those affected by the cuts. The judgment specifically requires the DWP to implement new procedures for assessing the mental health impact of future policy changes. The media coverage of the case has also been noteworthy, with many outlets finally giving prominence to stories they had previously overlooked. Journalists who attended the hearings described being moved to tears by some of the testimony, leading to a shift in how benefits issues are reported in the mainstream press. This change in narrative has helped to challenge long-standing stereotypes about benefit claimants and build public support for reform. The victory has also highlighted the importance of data and record-keeping in government decision-making. The court was particularly critical of the DWP's failure to maintain proper records of how decisions were made and their impacts on claimants. New requirements for comprehensive data collection and regular public reporting have been imposed as part of the ruling. Local authorities across the country have welcomed the ruling, as many had been struggling to cope with the increased demand for emergency support created by benefit cuts. Council leaders have reported being overwhelmed by requests for assistance from residents who had lost benefits, with some authorities forced to establish food banks and emergency housing services to prevent humanitarian crises in their communities.